Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2020 Arts Alive virtual program, which encompasses all the visual and audiovisual industries. That the program is going to happen between September and December 2020, with all various art forms from film, music, dance, uh, jazz, uh, contemporary art. So all of these programs are happening on various streams online. Thank you to the City of Johannesburg that has made this opportunity possible for the arts to continue promoting and being improved, even through COVID and the situation that we find ourselves in. And today, for your host, my name is Ntabileng Pura from the Gauteng Film Commission, and I would like to introduce my panel, and I would like to introduce Mayenzeka Basa, who is from AAA Entertainment, and Helen Kuhn from Indigenous Films Distribution. Mayenzeka, can you just do a quick introduction of yourself and expand more on what AAA does?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tabileng. And afternoon to everyone watching, depending which platform you're watching from, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook or Instagram. My name is Mayenzeka Basa, as Tabileng mentioned. I head up AAA Entertainment, which is a sales and distribution company. So we are a global distribution. Basically, we buy and sell films from Africa for the rest of the world, from the world to the continent. And we represent mostly lots of South African films as well as television series, and we sell them globally. We, at the same time, also come in alien projects. We do production as well as financing of projects when necessary. Yeah, so I think, we've been in the business for the past 8 years as a sales and distribution company, but before that, we've just been doing a lot of production in the South African space.
Okay, thank you, Maya. Helen?
Hi there, my name is Helen Kuhn from Indigenous Film Distribution. We are a boutique distributor that's particularly focused on local content. So the bulk of it is from South Africa, but occasionally we do manage to acquire some African films for this market. We focus particularly on sales in Africa. So we will release classically, ideally a film in cinemas first, and then followed by VOD, which is really box office, DSTV box office in South Africa. There's very few other options that deliver reasonable audiences, and then we'll sell it onto television, whether it's Mnet or SABC or ETV, sometimes Canal Plus on the rest of the continent. So our focus is not global. Our focus is local content for local audiences, but we do also participate in investing in some projects. And in that regard, we will look at world cinema films that can win awards, films that can be popular on the continent, not just in South Africa, and some other titles that could be mainstream that may have which would have particularly a Black consumer audience appeal for the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you so much. Then right straight into it. Then we had COVID. Then we had a list of films which you were supposed to distribute, because I know in my little understanding, distributors have a year plan. You don't wake up today and distribute your film. So there's been a plan of programs and films which are supposed to be distributed, obviously between March and December. And all of that was affected when the lockdown hit us, and the COVID-19 regulations required for some of the obviously active and mass gathering activities to be cancelled. How did the impact of COVID-19 affect distributors from where you're sitting?
Well, I think let me kick off because obviously the key factor was cinemas were closed. So and of course we were all in the same position worldwide. It's not that it happened only to us locally. So the flexibility was at the order of the day. I think if you distribute, because we don't get into production like Mayenzeka and the AAA team would, we distribute and participate in films and develop films. So at least the thing is, as much as people were not going out to see content on a big screen, there was a surge of viewership and interest in content on smaller screens. So for the films that we had lined up for that period to release theatrically, we literally had to sit with each producer and say, okay, well, what is the best plan forward for your film? Some films could go directly to DStv box office, like a Griquastad or a Stam, which the English title is The Tree. Another title, Seriously Single, we sold on to Netflix for worldwide, not just for Africa. And other titles simply had to move out to next year. I think we're really only all going to feel the impact on the cinema side in the first 2 quarters of next year, because it's not just our own films that are dated on the industry lineup, it's everybody's films, all the distributors, all the studios. So every film that moves has a forward impact on the films around it. So I think the avalanche is actually still coming. It will really only hit us on a cinema level next year in the first quarter, because now there's a rush for screens and we're going to have major congestion in that period. So it remains a balancing act. But the key factor would just be look for the best time for every film that can earn its best revenue and still deliver it to the intended audience, even though that may not necessarily have included the cinema leg. So, you know, that's the upside, is if you work in distribution, you're working with all the various platforms, not just the cinemas.
Yeah, I
and
think
then Maya, from your side?
Yeah, to add to what Helen said, I think the major impact was in the theatrical space, for sure. There's always, I guess, the thing that comes with having the red carpet, and being able to go to cinemas. So, but that didn't happen. So when COVID came, that kind of really came to a standstill. But the opportunities, of course, opened, as Helen said. If we take a lesson from Seriously Single, like one of those, or any other titles that went either to DStv, box office, or Netflix. But I guess from our side, as a company, the key factor is that we never really get projects that specifically goes to either to just directly to global or directly to specific platforms without it starting in the cinema space. So even from our side, because all the projects now that were not going to go to cinema suddenly were not available just for us to be able to exploit. And because I guess local distributors like Helen Kuhn were forced to do different deals, were forced to do alternative deals. But at the same time, even when the opportunity opened, where now everyone was sitting at home and platforms were looking for more content, or even the television space broadcasters were looking for even more content to fill the slots. You must understand, so when COVID happened, production stopped. Now, because there's no production, which means everything else we could sell kind of stopped as well. Whatever was fresh, was new for us to sell, really came to a standstill. The challenge we have in South Africa is that there's not many people who have a library of content that they own. Most content is either owned by broadcasters, but independent producers own nothing. So it's difficult to exploit whatever they had, or whatever they had was already been exploited. Everything new really kind of came to a standstill. So I think that's where the kind of the challenges was, that there was just like a shortage of stuff to sell. So we can, I think what worked the most, international content that came in numbers was really selling into the local space. So, but African content didn't really exist, because you must understand, producers in South Africa, they produce, now they sell the same year, right? So they don't have like 4 projects they're working on, or 5 projects or slate. They're just working on that one project they've been financing for the past 5 years. And when everything else came to a standstill, there was nothing else to be able to, to push into the market.
Manteki, you did mention before, though, that you saw a pickup in the advertising VOD numbers of some of your titles overseas during the COVID period, even though they may have been catalog titles.
Yeah, exactly. My point was that because there was an appetite now, right, for content. So let's say the AVOD platforms, which normally we would consider as the last option. So in the distribution space, you have, as Helen Kuhn, you have cinema, then you have TVOD, and then you have pay TV, free to air, and sometimes the same time as free to, you can have SVOD platforms. So AVOD, advertiser funded, or what's called free VOD, is normally something we consider later, because also they don't pay upfront. They do what's called revenue share. And oftentimes you do these rev share deals and you never see the money. But now, because of COVID and people didn't have the money, and people were at home, needed to watch. So the AVOD platforms were really where people were going for them. They had data in other countries, not like in South Africa, right? Globally, they've got data, and there was free to air. So they were watching a lot of content. So some of the older titles, as Helen could mention, the revenue started spiking, which means more people are watching. And I couldn't really, there was not enough content to be able to feed that. But whatever I had was library already was starting to show the numbers. But I think also that presents an opportunity that as we go forward, those AVOD platforms now have become the norm. More and more, it just has created a new sort of distribution platform where we can populate the content into. The challenge again is that filmmakers are so used to want to be paid upfront. They say, okay, here's a deal, but how much can you give me upfront? But this AVOD platform is saying, put your content in there, let people watch, and the advertisers will pay the money based on how many people watch. And those ones have really been doing very, very well.
Which then means that there was an opportunity in some countries, and there was actually a loss in some countries, because for South Africa, we got issues of data, meaning even the content that was available was not really accessed as much as it could potentially be if data was available, versus in other countries where data is more available. It means business there rocked up high, and it made sense to then have advertising space, as you are now referring, and making more money out of a placement.
Yeah, I think, see, the advertiser funded, so this is what called this AVOD, right? Advertiser funded VOD platforms. There's not really, I don't know, maybe Helen, I don't know if there's anyone that exists in South Africa. I know that you was trying something similar to that. So there's not a lot of them, because it's just there's not much market for it yet I guess in Africa. Globally, it's become a norm. You have major AVOD platforms that are basically driven by bigger advertising companies. So in like, let's say in countries like the US, there's like big AVOD platforms. But in South Africa or Africa, they're almost non-existent. So I think with time, where, as you say, with data, as well as the understanding of the market, there's an opportunity there. I do know lots of people are thinking about AVOD platforms in the continent, but it's like a YouTube, to be honest, right? So a YouTube in the continent will serve as that. But in other countries like North America or South America, there's structured AVOD platforms where you have better reporting, as well as the beta data, system management systems that can tell you how many people watched, and this is your revenue. So I think globally, yes, there's been an opportunity, but in the continent, I don't think there's any platforms that really exist.
No, there isn't. AVOD is not really, well, other than YouTube, as you mentioned, there is really nowhere to put it. I mean, if you look for AVOD content, generally all you're going to find is pirate content on the continent at the moment. So as far as VOD is concerned, really the key platforms are the DStv box office, the one that goes with Canal Plus. They have their own kind of catch-up system.
Yeah.
Then it's Netflix and Showmax.
Yeah.
They are really the ones that have an active focus. I think Mnet, obviously, as we all know, have been doing this for a long time. I don't think anybody spends more money on local content than Mnet does.
Yeah.
They've got 6 African channels to program, 6 South African Mzansi channels, 5 KykNet channels, and then they're expanding into the high-end television series as well. So it's quite a big beast to feed with local content. And then obviously Netflix starting to come online and looking at African content and wanting African content for Africa and for the rest of the world. It's created a new opportunity, because Showmax and DStv obviously work hand in hand. It's part of MultiChoice, both companies. So if you're doing the one, you're kind of by default doing the other one.
Yeah.
But AVOD is not really. We've actually looked at a YouTube channel for Indigenous in the past, especially because DVD, well, during COVID in particular, especially because DVD is dying, right? I mean, to the only DVD manufacturing plant or the biggest one, CDT, has closed down now. So to make DVDs and to actually get them sold is really, you know, you're talking about 30, 40, 50, 120 DVDs that you're selling. It's just not worth duplicating if that's the number of units you're moving. But there is we find an ongoing request for catalog titles with the local films. So we were looking into that to see if there was a way to package it that it is actually available on a pay-per-view basis on a YouTube channel, but it's much more complex than it sounds. You need to have a base of thousands of people to ultimately make it worth it. So, you know, it's probably better to just put a pay gate on the website and on a, you know, or put the films on Vimeo, because you can actually put films on Vimeo as well, obviously, and people can pay to watch it. It doesn't have to be free.
So would you say then that would be part of the recovery plan, with what could be available for distribution?
Yeah, I think yeah. So go ahead.
I think the cinemas will normalize in Tabaleng. I mean, that is not going to go away. We're in a slightly better position with the cinemas in South Africa than some of the other countries. I mean, but again, it's a block by block scenario. You've got, at the moment, China just this week overtook the US as the biggest cinema market because people are flocking back to cinemas as the lockdown restrictions have lifted. Vietnam is doing insane numbers at the box office, but the US and the UK are flatlining. I mean, AMC Cinemas, Regal Cinemas, Cinemax, Cinemark, the cinemas are all closed down and plan to be closed down for another 6 months. Our cinema started opening from the 28th of August, again, in a phased fashion. All the screens were not open straight away, and obviously they could only do 3 shows a day. It's looking a little bit better now already, just in numbers or attendances on a given weekend than what it did 2 months ago, but it's still running at 25% of what a typical cinema weekend industry-wise would have been worth before COVID. So I think everything will come back online, and the recovery plan, if we could call it that, is, you know, it's kind of up and running, if you like. I mean, I think we're all looking for more and more content for various platforms, and I think content creators are also now comfortable and willing for distributors to say, okay, well, let's look at getting your content onto this platform, that platform, whatever other platform, not just the obsession with cinema. So cinema is a particular experience. It's, you know.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I mean, to agree with Helen that the fantasy of cinema being the everything, right? I think that is kind of like, I think filmmakers are starting to understand that there is other platforms. Like, I do think cinema will normalize, but also it presents opportunities, you know, for collaboration with other countries. You know, like you said, I mean, I'm a big fan of China. It's still yet a market to be tapped by African content creators. They always the notion of looking into North America. Of course, North America will normalize, but the loss they've had with cinemas, like you said, all the cinemas that are closing down is massive. That recovery is going to take a bit of time. But I guess from the South African or African perspective it's kind of making us to relook in terms of how we're going to finance the projects. So you must understand that money is not going to be readily available, but also most money to invest in, even in our film and television business. A lot of private equity doesn't really exist. So even though those people had free money, it's going to be hard for them. But it's probably also an opportunity because it's the only industry that's kind of sort of COVID safety. If you can create the library up front before COVID, you know, it's because everyone is going to be watching. If we go into pandemic and into lockdown again, people are going to have to watch something, whether they watch it on any platform or they're going to be entertained somehow. And you see, during COVID, people have watched so much TV. I think both DSTV, Box Office, Showmax, and Netflix reported the spike in terms of numbers of how many people watched content during lockdown. And I think lockdown also has made people aware of priorities. I think more and more people will start to realize where they need to spend the money. It's people need to, but it's gonna be difficult. You know, I think our economy has been hit hard by the COVID. We have yet to feel the impact. As Helen said, yes, we, in terms of cinema release, but just in terms of the impact of the economy within our people, we will feel it for the next 2 years. I think next year is going to be even much more harder. I do know the president has put some recovery plans in place, but it presents an opportunity for us to keep people happy, entertained, and I think that's where the opportunity is within our industry. But like I said, I think the producers now will learn to trust us, will learn to come to us for advice where we said, okay, let's look at this option. AVOD is also an option. TVOD or that market first is an option. I think more and more content creators will come to us and kind of really listen to what I guess we have to say.
Just one other thing to add there, Ntabaleng, is something that has, we're getting endless requests at the moment. And I know the NFE have put a brief out. So a number of people have gotten funding to do various kinds of drive-in initiatives. So that does seem to be something that's popping up more and more that will also create a different kind of opportunity. And some of these drive-ins, will, because of the format of projection that they have, will not have access to brand new content if they don't have DCP kits. Yeah. So content that has a longer tail or crowd favorites or award-winning content that's local that we can supply to them in a format that they can use, will find another opportunity in that environment. So there's definitely a lot of bubbling going on with that.
Which then comes to the point that what Mayenzek is saying is that as part of, I think it was going to lead to my next point, saying, then how do we then start creating that business model that now production houses begin to trust distributors and start approaching them at a script level development? Because then once you understand the script development and you partner at that initial stage, it makes it easy for the distributor to then advise best at which alternative platforms outside of cinema one could propose and one could look into to actually better make more money or get content spreading to wider territories as possible.
I think there's two or maybe three lines of discussion here, because we particularly focus on feature films. So AAA, they'll do TV series and documentary as well, but our focus is particularly feature films. So people do submit to us on the website or directly. I can give you a level. In the last 18 months, Tandeka Zwana, that's our development exec, has assessed 363 projects. So people do come to us. Many people do come early on and say, can we have feedback? Sometimes, the feedback can vary. Some projects have wide potential. Other projects are what it's going to cost to make that project versus what it is likely to earn just doesn't make any financial sense. So we do give that feedback. And the earlier, the better, of course, that one can have a discussion about being realistic around the market space and the available platforms. And if it's a content that can travel, equally for a sales agent like AAA to look at it and say, can we sell this internationally? Because they've got very good information around what they have managed to sell internationally and what has sold and what doesn't sell. Because sometimes you do a sale and when the numbers come back, the platform is not really happy with how it performed. So it's an ongoing evolution of knowledge and information. So the most straightforward way to submit to us is to go to the website and submit a form for either distribution or development, because we will assess it for both. And I think more and more people are becoming more comfortable to do that earlier rather than later. And some projects really, unfortunately, make no sense financially. If it can't be made with soft funding, doing revenue estimates is really critical, and it's very hard at the moment to do revenue estimates because a big chunk of where revenue would come from has shifted. And you can't be giving numbers or revenue expectations to funders that are unrealistic. We have very few funders of feature films in the country. We need to protect those funders and share whatever information we have with them, that they have the best possible chance of making their money back if they invest in projects. Otherwise, why would they continue doing it? You know, it is an industry at the end of the day. It is a business as much as it's built on talent and creativity.
Has application forms where people could just apply and submit their concepts and their plans through to you?
Yes, it's on the website, indigenousfilm.co.za. I think you also have.
Yeah, we
also have on your side,
yes,
right?
Yeah, we also have, because I think we've also realized, I mean, people are submitting now, since I think there's more and more people who sort of understand the need for distributors to a certain degree, right? But with, of course, even though they don't understand everything, but they do understand now we're supposed to go. There's been a lot of preaching about starting with distributors before. And we created that form because, again, as Helen said, at first we are a business. So whatever projects we get involved in has to sort of show that it's going to yield some revenue for us as well. So we're not in the business of writing letters of interest or saying we like your project, but we have to be honest and say to people, yes, we like this project, we can get involved, but also we have to see that we can generate some revenue. You must understand that none of us make money during production. So even though we have to finance, we have to have the thing get financed, myself or Helen Kuhn, we're not on the line items for the production budget. So we have to make sure that the film has potential to earn revenue beyond being produced. And if it doesn't meet those, then we don't get involved. And to be honest, there's not enough of us. Yes, we can look at different projects, but we're not going to take every project that comes our way. We will give input. We have to make sure that we're going to earn money. We're going to make money from this project, and we're going to make money for the creator. Because at the end of the day, we only make money when the project makes money, to be honest.
Of course.
So I think that is important to understand, because, you know, a distributor or a sales agent only earns commission from the sales that they secure. So we are basically in the same boat with a different discipline with the creatives, because if we're not selling or releasing or getting your content in front of viewers and audiences, we're not, when we're not earning commission. It's not like when a project comes to us and we say to a producer, well, pay us 10 Rand or R1 million or whatever to do the work, and we'll do the work, and then the film will go out, and it's your problem whether it makes money or not. It's a commission. Well, it's a revenue share scenario. It's a commission earning business. Yeah.
And a lot of risk, because it's that risk that as a distributor you have to take. But upon taking that risk, then you have to push the risk so that it's very minimum as possible so that you can get the commission. But also filmmakers are looking at you to say, you're supposed to perform magic. We are expecting you as a distributor to give us all these millions in the bag, and we want Box Office Mojo to be recording good numbers, because I think that's where it lies. Because at the end, after the creator is done, they're looking at you to say, perform your magic and show me what you claim you have.
Yeah, I think, it's so funny. I always say this to people. I mean, there's amazing stories, but there's always this thing where every creator always think their baby is the best, right? It's gonna make billions of rands. Not even millions. It's gonna make billions of rands, right? And us as distributors, because we are always market facing, and Helen can tell you, when you do the numbers, you realize it's not gonna make the numbers you think it's gonna make. You might be lucky if it does, but there's always this thing of thinking that, you are the problem as the distributor. And that's not always the case. And we do, of course, when we get into project, we do our best to make sure that it gets to where it needs to be. Of course, at the end of the day, it still depends to the creator to make sure that what they put on paper is what we're going to see on screen. Because those can be two different things. Then at the end of the day, it's about, then we take it to the market that we promise we're going to bring it back to. And oftentimes, there's also investors in the business, like finances, who comes in and said, if you said you're going to make this much money, okay, are you sure this is the money you're going to make? And there's lots of pressures that comes to us, not necessarily from the production person, but also from people who wants to invest in the project, because they also think we're going to make magic. But at the end of the day, yes, it's a risky business, but we do the most risk, to be honest, because we lose a lot of time, in trying to find these, and that time may not even yield any results. Of course, same thing as the financer, you put in money, but your money may not come back.
Sure.
But oftentimes, people think we need to be the last people. We need to negotiate our fee. We need to, we must charge 1% of the commission, because they think our job is the easiest job. We just sign the contract, send it to someone, pay us the money. but that's not the case, So
I can imagine, because I think even as funders, which is I'll speak from the Gauteng Film Commission side, is people always think you've got the bag of money in your handbag, and everywhere where you go, you must just approve somebody's project and give them the money and do not ask too many questions. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because I think when we're also trying to make film a business, the most important part of it is what happens after it's been done, it's been produced. Yes, jobs have been created. Then what? Because in the history and the experience that I had in the past, is that there's so much content that we have, but because of many reasons, that it was not either meeting the standards of the producer, meeting standards of a theatrical release, meeting standards of any other platform, we've got content that is gathering dust. And that is maybe purely because the distribution engagement was not available at the beginning, for one to know that after spending so much money, these is what is available, and these are the deliverables to meet cinema distribution, or to meet a broadcasting distribution. And I think these are the challenges that we've always had, because when we took content from the film resource unit, there were thousands of films which we really could not make much of, and it gathered dust, and it made some of the filmmakers to lose hope and actually leave the industry. Others got into depression. Others are soldiering on, and they're trying to get this thing right. So my next question would then be, looking at where we are now, what is the current appetite outside of the box office reports which I've read? Was that comedy in South Africa and drama is the one that is picking up? Horror it's doing terribly, not as good. What are we looking at now in the new wave, new energy, new content? What are audiences looking for right now?
Seems to be, if we just base it on what hit good numbers during COVID, and the lot of bit of information we have of people being back in cinema, horror can do really, really well on an SVOD platform, but it often flatlines in a cinema environment. So, Netflix had a title up called Eight, which did really, really good numbers for them. And we've released a number of horror films in cinema over the years, and it's a very tricky audience in a cinema environment. People don't seem to choose horror as a first choice when they're going out to go and do something, and then they choose to watch a film as part of them going out. So I think comedy and romance will always be at the top of the list, doubling. I mean, seriously, Single on Netflix did really well. It was in the top 3 in over 30 countries. So, and that's a chick flick, but it's got comedy in it. It's got romance in it. I think people have been stuck indoors for so long in various levels of circumstances. Indoors can be a small space, it can be a big space. It still means you can't go anywhere. You have to just stay there. So I think escapism or entertainment, and bubblegum entertainment, if you like, will always be at the top of the list. You saw it after the world wars as well. That's how Hollywood was started, is the challenging type films and the art house sort of European style films didn't do the good numbers. When people come through a bad time financially and with health and losing friends and losing jobs and all of that, entertainment will remain at the top of their list. You want to escape. So I imagine that's going to remain the same. The film that's performed the best so far of the new releases is Tenet, as everybody expected. Mulan has done pretty reasonable business. the local films that are going out is really only starting to happen now again in the next couple of weeks. So I think Doorbos, which Film Infinity is releasing, should do reasonable numbers. We're going with Flatland next on the 30th of October, but it's a thinking person's film. It's feminist Western, so it's obviously not everybody's taste. So I think that box office report will remain the same. And when you look at the SVOD reporting, there is a website now I see that's starting to track and rank the SVOD performances. You may have different types of content spiking, like, for instance, the horror example. But generally, content that takes you out of your reality, that isn't the drag me through everything I see on the news every day type of storytelling. If you want to have wider reach, that unfortunately, or fortunately, would be the first
choice
thing to consider, first choice. And you can, I think it's like the thing of 10 people in a room, right? You can give 10 people in a room a choice of 4 films, and you're still going to find a trend among, or 100 people in a room. You're still going to find a trend. There will be, by default, mathematically, a number 1, 2, 3, 4 choices made based on the offering. And 99% of the time, if there's a choice of 4 or 5 films and you have 100 people choosing, 50 of them are going to choose comedy or romance. And the other 50 will choose between the remaining 4 films. So I think that's more of a human nature thing, an emotional and psychological thing about human beings, rather than necessarily a pre-COVID or a post-COVID thing. Entertainment is an emotional offering.
Yeah. Also,
Isaac, are you experiencing the same thing on your side? That comedy and romance seem to be taking on more attention, even for audience recipients, more than all the other genres?
What's been quite interesting for us was that is in this AVOD platform, is the titles we see that have been spiking up, and those tend to be the romantic comedies more than the other, right? And these AVOD are like global platforms, even on all these TVOD. But again, I think like Helen said, when you're home and you're sitting in front of a TV, you tend to skew towards where you can watch together as a family or with a partner, especially in this lockdown. It's not like these individuals watching by themselves. But of course, you never know what could work. Like it could be horror, it could be adult content working. I do think there's not purely good statistics with COVID, because people have been forced into a form of desperation and confinement. So not necessarily given choices, to be honest. But what we've seen, of course, romance, comedy seems to spike. Other ways of actually, that we used to check was that if you look at a box office, if you look at maybe what people are watching on Showmax or Netflix, and you trace in terms of what's being popular and what people are talking about, maybe that gives you a gauge of what's really genres are working. So I do think, it's all comes down to great stories at the moment. Yes, there's always the norms of romantic comedy, action comedy, romance dramas, high-end dramas. Those ones, from the previous, we know those ones work. But horror now, we've seen the spike with this 8 from the African perspective. But there's no other horrors to compare with that have been on that platform from this continent, to be honest, right? So it's only that one. So we have to be able to feed that platform with as many horror films and then compare if it's just horror or it's just a specific type of horror with maybe a different type of cast. So I do think what has been just the general norm is romance is kind of key, and comedy. So those ones really work, but it has to be good romance and it has to be good comedy, because you say this to people and they bring you what they deem as romance and then what they deem as comedy, and those are two different things. So,
but I think the other thing is always to remember, I think if one had to see it from the creative's point of view, is the principle is always there is a market for everything. It's just the size and the value of the market in money is not exactly the same from film to film to film. So if you don't want to make romance and you don't want to make comedy and you want to make you know, an art house award-winning film that may be particular, addressing a particular issue or drives a particular message, there's a place for that film. You know, that film will find an audience. We will find a platform where it will find an audience. It's just the tougher the stories are, the more demanding they are, the higher their age ratings are, it tends to then eat into the audience potential, because lots of people just simply don't want to watch, especially on the continent, stuff that's got you know, too much violence or politics or whatever. And I mean, I say it's on the continent, but really it's worldwide, whether you're addressing Irish politics or Polish politics or South African politics or whatever in a narrative, the audience for that will always be classically smaller, and it will have a higher age rating than what it would be if you're making a rom-com.
Yeah, I think
and
the
we don't have
expectations
enough content that's all ages. You know, we just, I don't know why, but so many of our films, on the one hand, it means that we are courageous enough to tackle difficult issues. But so many of the films are 16 or 18 rated films. We have very few PG or 10 to 12, like Manzek is saying, that you can watch with your whole family.
And I think I want to come back to that. Sorry, Maya. Is that the one thing that the most neglected audiences, and I think this is where for me audience development begins. It's content that is created for children that are between the ages of 3 and to 10, if I may call it that, particularly locally. Yet you find that the most or majority of the films that are doing well in cinema are those that are targeted to children. You know, look at your Spider-Man, your the princess and the frog. But in South Africa, there's a limited content available for children, and that is one a genre that is really we are not taking serious attention into. And I think for me, audience development begins there, because we can't talk about appreciation of local content when there's no content for a 3-year-old to start understanding South African content, being familiar to South African stars, being familiar to the stories which they can associate with. How are we going to create a balance for that? Because I think that's one of the gaps that we have. That's the one a group that we're really not focusing much on. And the second group which we are not focusing on is the audiences between the ages of 60 to 70. No one is really creating content for these two gaps. And I think that for me is something that I think needs a conversation, because there isn't really much, but there is proven data that children content is actually making lots of money, even in South Africa.
Yeah. I think, you know, I mean, maybe Helen can comment in the 60 and above, you know, even in the kids' content in terms of cinema. But also we've seen, you know, like this is what Disney did. You see all these big franchises, whether it be Disney, Universal, or Pixar, all these things that are focused on the kids' content. We know they have a massive market, and these companies are just printing dollars every day, right? Now the question whether to ask our content creators whether we like money or not. I think that's kind of the question, or where we just don't like money. And I do think there's a freedom to the creative sense of wanting to create what you know and what you want to be able, where there's a message you want to portray. Now, and it questions whether, you know, what type of a society we are in terms of creators, whether are we family orientated or not. Because if you think about it, family content which speaks to kids, it's very important. And it's probably, it will change how things are, you know, like besides just purely animation, even live action or family dramas. It's what kids or what all broadcasters program from 8 a.m. in the morning till 5 p.m., right? It's all family content and kids content. It's mostly, you go to SABC, MultiChoice, ETV, anyone else, that's what they have. And they fill those slots. Now, that thing, it makes you wonder, why aren't content creators in South Africa creating this content? And we can tell you from the distribution perspective, it is lucrative content. It is the most sought after. It's the content that doesn't really exist. But if you created that in numbers, going, say, in feature films, in television dramas, teen dramas, none of these things exist. And this is the most important content to create. So it's a conversation to have. I think it's the next level of really educating people the needs and the demands for this content. And I think oftentimes we have a very mature society that without thinking, we actually neglect children, right? We neglect our kids. And I think it's something that's embedded in our society, because when you're thinking for the kids, when you're thinking about your children, you will think about creating content for them. And I think it's something we've seen in our company as well, that we realize that it's something we need to start looking at, just purely from the distribution, we know it's a wholesome thing to do. So I think that there's an opportunity there. And I think there's an education, even from the funding perspective. I think from early development, from organizations like yours,
Yes.
FC, NFVF, these ones that want to develop new audiences. I do think there needs to be some sort of slates being created that's only speak to family and children's content.
And children's content, because I think, I always say that when I grew up, I was developed, if I may put it that way, liking Chinese. I mean, in the townships, there was always a hall closed with plastics, and would watch Chinese content, even though we never knew what they were saying, we never understood what they were saying, but I suppose that was not important. But as a result, you can play any Chinese films right now. I can follow, because there was audience development which had gone under through the Chinese content, if I may put it that. But besides Kumba, besides Zambezia, besides
Jungle Beat, whatever.
Yes, Jungle Maze. Besides the content that is done by Leon Schuster, we don't have South African content for early child development. As a result, there was also a catch-22 when even there was homeschooling, because all parents had to do homeschooling all of a sudden. Then everybody wanted content to refer to make examples for kids, and we didn't have of our own to explain things further, but to also get kids to understand basics of the basics using audiovisual. We do not have.
That's
so
absolutely true.
We do agree that there is a need.
No, there's a real need in Tabaleng, absolutely. I mean, we've, over time, we actually started dubbing some animated content from the rest of the world into local languages to be able to reach young kids. If it's been mostly animation, but because there's absolutely nothing other than, as you say, Kumba Zambezia, Jungle Beats, Jock of the Bushvelds, like ages ago already. And we did Kings of Mulberry Street, which, that just live action one that played to younger kids. But it's a real gap. And because it's a real gap is why we started repackaging animation from various places in the world into, Zulu, Afrikaans, Xhosa, whatever. We're looking at more and more. The ideal would obviously be to do it in all 10 languages, because other than English, because it comes in English already. But we've done that with that consciously driving it, because there's nothing for kids in the feature film environment. And they're a tricky audience, obviously, as well, because obviously you need to present content to the parents that the parents deem to be fit for the kids to watch. And it's quite interesting when you start delving into it, how many things, you just see in content, language-wise and action-wise and whatever, that is not really suited for kids. So to even find animation from other places in the world, independent animation that will speak to a 5-year-old and still deliver wholesome values, is not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah.
It's a big. I completely agree with you. I mean, how on earth can we expect a teenager, because we're starting to see that teenagers, it's very tough to get them to choose local films, because we've had this gap, as you say, where the only local content they would have seen would have been whatever television series or soap operas or whatever they've been watching. So, and that is not the same proposition as a feature film, or when you're going on a date to choose a feature film. Mm-hmm. So teenagers are a very tough audience to sell to anyway. So if you're not developing a taste or an appetite for local content when children are little, How on earth do you expect them to leap across and choose local feature films by the time they're 16?
Mm.
And how on earth will we then get to the, you know, bigger audiences? The biggest films, attendances wise, have been the films that play to the family, like the Kandasamis or, you know, Broken
Yes.
Promises, or they get big attendances because you can take your 6-year-old granny, mom, sister, brother, girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, everybody can watch. So it's a real gap. Family content and kids content is a real gap.
Yeah, and also, you know, it's what's so funny. I mean, if you look, I think Disney now is starting to change. Also, having family content, even animation that is representative of who we are. You know, hardly we had black characters, right, in animation, but now maybe they're starting to come. But you know, there's still a massive need in that space. I mean, even the stuff you watch from Disney is still not necessarily represented. I mean, my 6-year-old child, every time he browses via Netflix or whatever, and he's looking for content that has people that look like him, and it's limited. And he'll tell me, Daddy, I just finished this series. What more can I see? I'm like, dude, I don't know. He says, don't you work for Netflix or Apple? Why don't you just make one? You get what I'm saying? So I get this because these kids now at 6-year-old, these schools, they're making them to have conversations. It's like he watched something called Raising Dion, which is, I think, it's one of the platforms. It's got a black kid who's a superhero, who's got this thing. And he says to me, when am I going to get season 2? I'm like, why? He's like, there's nothing else I'd want to watch, because for the first time, he can find a character that looks like him and that's representative. It's not Barbie or something else. So, and more, those stories are needed. And like I said, during lockdown, you know, I had a conversation with one of the private schools where they're looking for content that has black kids to be able to use it as part of the class, right? Because, you know, of all of that. And it didn't exist even on YouTube. It was difficult to search for it. And here in South Africa, we have the opportunity to be able to create that because we're an English-speaking country and we have a massive black population, but we're not creating even just TV series. So we don't really have a lot of this content. So like Helen said, there's an opportunity there that just presents itself purely from the development perspective of the like GFC as well as KZN or NFF, just to help develop properties that are like this.
A kids slate, you know, I mean, there's been across the organizations, there's been women's slates and, you know, short form slates and emerging filmmaker slates, and there's been a number of various slates, but I think there would be great value in a kids slate if a call went out for that.
Yeah, and to add to that, Helen, you know, it's so funny. There's one genre, or there's one sort of market that often people neglect, right? Which I saw even, you know, in the VOD space that tends now to, you know, to grow. It's the faith-based market. Now, and faith-based and family values tend to overlap to a certain degree, right? But they also they miss opportunities that, you know, Africa as a whole, as Helen can tell you, you know, swearing and all these other things are not accepted, but faith-based will play a major African appeal because just by the nature that Africa is very Christian or very religious.
Very religious.
So very religious to a certain degree. So and that's a market that's not even tapped into, even in the feature film space. We've been bringing a lot of international content that are faith-based, but it just doesn't hit that market yet. I mean, we went through a process as a company where we were doing all this exhibition of faith-based content to churches and to different, and we saw there was hunger. There was a hunger for local faith-based content, but it has to be done well. And there's a market there without just really being very over the top, but just making people to, you know, and it's not necessarily, it's not very denominational or it's not very, but it's just, it could be in any faith, but there's such a hunger for that type of content, and it doesn't exist, to be honest. And there's lots for it that exist as well in broadcasters, even in the VOD platform. We bought like a faith-based family content, you know, one of them, it didn't do well in the box office, but onto a VOD platform, it just became like, it shoot the lights up. It was insane. So, and these are the things we have to look, where do we put this content, which platforms? It may not necessarily work for the cinema audience, but it may work for a VOD platform or straight to TV. But this is the content that needs to be created.
So, with from the two companies, theatrically coming back to that, what should we look out for? What should audiences? Because I think, because as you were saying, Helen, that people want alternative entertainment. People are tired of being at home. People are, they want everything and anything that is outside. And drive-ins have done very well. I saw in the various film festival, Encounters did them. Durban did Encounters. There's the guy who's in partnership with Indigenous Linda, who's doing a drive-in at the Mary Fitzgerald and at the Walter Sisulu Botanical Gardens, and that is also picking up. So on a cinema stream, what is coming your way between now and at least the festive season? Are there any releases that were on hold which you are intending to release?
Yes, we were going to go with Barakat in December, but we've moved it out to May now. The film is doing its awards run first. So what will go first, if you're talking local content in particular,
Yes.
the Flatland is releasing on the 30th of October, which is a very cool movie. Actually, it's quite unexpected when you watch it, because you haven't seen like badass chick Western type local film really being made. So, and it's a star-studded cast. So it's Jenna Bass's third film, and then Valedictory, which is Jamil Kubeka's next film, is still in early December at the moment, and it's set in that matric rage period time. It's three friends that are on a road trip after they finished school, so it should play pretty young. There's one Afrikaans film going from Finity, as I mentioned, Toerbos, which is based on an Italian Mattia book, so that would translate to Magic Forest. So that should do it. Screen at Silver Scanum last year, so I think that will do pretty well. And as much as people will go for local stuff in Tabaling, I think we need the tent poles to go that people can overcome the fear of being in a public space. So, a Wonder Woman or whatever, a Bond or whatever, when these films release, I think that creates great opportunity for marketing activations around the local films, because new material, the sequel to Material, is also going early next year. So there's more in next year than there is currently. Because it's as Manzeki said, the volume is the volume. There is only X number of films available. So it's we're sort of running at that sort of 20 to 25 titles in a year from South Africa that release.
We need to get to a point where we can double those numbers. I mean, like, again, it comes down to development. I think there needs to be some sort of way how we finance properties. And the one thing I actually realized, the funding partners in South Africa don't talk to each other. GFC, NFVF, because no one really talked to each other and say, guys, let's come together. This is the plan. We are all funding different parts, and I can understand, but there needs to also be even like a bigger plan where, there needs to be a way, how do we finance, but in those conversations, bring in distribution early on so that it pave a way on how funding what needs to be funded, right? And how to flood the market. I think that's the issue. I mean, for us, normally everything that Helen has mentioned or anything else, we come in to almost all the projects to look at the global market to see if there's an opportunity. So whatever will come into the market will probably have an ear on it, or we'll be looking at it for the global market to see if there's opportunity. But often most of the titles that are created don't appeal. They just like sit flat in the local market, and that's it. And just because it's like there's a need to flood the local market, there's nothing wrong with that, but also there needs to be sort of like an extra layer that can extend towards the global market. And I think the difficulty which we find now, I mean, I work very closely with Helen, where at the moment we find that I think we need to kind of come up early on and look at projects that we know we can take from development all the way to the global market. And those we become very specific about those. But everything else that we take is always limited because, you know, you only see the producer when they want a letter of interest. Then you see them when they finished it, and you don't know what happened in between. Like, where's the film that you told me is going to be now is totally different because there's just there's no communication. So.
I know. That reminds me, that's what you said earlier, to say every filmmaker, they think their film is what the country has been waiting for and it's going to be the best, only to find that things happen during production. And then the film that was pitched and the and the completed films, you feel like they're two different projects because I suppose things happen and creativity, we lose creativity because we are everything, you know. Directors are not focused only on the creative side. You have to worry yourself about finding, you have to worry yourself about editing, you have to worry about, so we tend to creatives become sales agents within their own productions because they are trying to juggle their productions around, and because of that, something will always be lost. Whether it's the good creativity of the content, or something will always go missing at the end because of then there's no full focus on the particular strength that the person have. That the director will only focus on directing, the producer will only focus on producing. You know, we always have to juggle these things around because of this lack of budget. But I think yes, I agree with you. We're only beginning to communicate more with agencies where now we are able to sit down and share productions with the GFC is supporting and the NAVF, and then we start saying, okay, let's see which ones we could support so that at least they're out of the loop and they could be completed so that they can make way for new productions. Because I think another thing that also creates the lack of a huge number or an added number of productions is that a lot of films take time to be completed because of lack of accessibility of funds. So you'll find that GFC has supported this 5, not this 5. So these ones are stuck, these ones are stuck. Then none of them are completing their products for them to compete. But I suppose you're correct to say once we then have that target of promoting this particular number of films, then we are able to get them produced quicker and then they can be out of the way. Then we can create more. But I think with everybody asking and finding money at different places, you find that a production will start primarily because of the monies. And because of others will say, we have met our targets, we can't help you this year, you'll have to wait until next year. And all of those things as well, I think from a government perspective, also creates to the delay, which could shorten the process of productions. And I will really not be shy about saying that, to say, I think also the lack of departmental communication that could potentially improve could then lead to a shorter time of production. And I think it's something that we are now beginning and trying to effect.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, Wenente, is that, you know, I could forgive first-time filmmakers, right? Them going and make, because it's going to be difficult first for me to just get global, you know, unless you like brilliant, you know, but, you know, you have to hone your skill in this industry, right? But established filmmakers who've been around for 20 years, you know, they should be doing 3 or 4 projects. And it comes down for me to, like I said, the intergovernmental. And nothing stops government to say, you know, I can count in my fingers, right? These are probably the top filmmakers in the country, right? There's like this 10 in this number. Even the top companies are like probably 10, right? These are the companies you can find. If you gave them each, you went to all of them, you said, I'm going to give you this much money, this much money, this much money, this much money, and I want you to give. And you don't even need a call out for that because you know them. You said, I want to give you this, I want to give you this. And at the end of the day, I want you, after 3 years, to bring me. You will have more, you'll be much more effective than what you're doing now, right? Where you find when people do application. But if you went to them, you said, what are your needs? What are your needs? What are your needs? Because you know they've been creating for 20 years. They know how to create. You say to them, here's money, here's a lump sum, here's a lump sum. 3 years later, 3 years down the line, or even 5 years, you will see so much impact because those guys will create amazing projects, will have the freedom to give you what is needed. At the same time, we'll have sustainable jobs for 5 years. So in a way, for me, it's, I mean, of course, you need to be able to have fine line issues, but that's a better funding model than what you're doing now, where people have to keep coming for that 20 or that million rand or that 200K or that 50K, so that one is not necessarily effective because they come when they're hungry. But if they know for 3 years, this is what they're working on and the funding is in place, you will have a much better impact. That's just my take on just how things should be financed. But the way we are, I mean, if you look at guys who've been in the business for 5 years, they still don't even, or 20 years, they can't even tell you if they own one thing. They don't even own one movie. Like, it's like, but what have you been doing for 20 years? Purely because the funding and the distribution has never been as involved. Because, and it's the best way to influence and to help people is to get involved. And from the government perspective, I think that's kind of like the most best impact you can ever make. And just say, cool, here we go. But, at the moment, it's just, we're going to go around like this, to be honest. That's just my take.
Hey, so,
yeah, I mean, what do you think, Helen? I mean, don't you think that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the thing is, it's basically you're talking about slates again, right?
Yeah.
Where you're saying, and it does exist in various places in the world, where you're saying particular production companies have to deliver X number of films over, if we're talking film, maybe the mix must be film and TV and whatever, doesn't have to be film only.
Yeah.
Over X period of time, this amount of money is released for development, so that from the beginning of thinking about developing 5 or 6 properties, not just one, doing a TV series in the mix and so on and so forth. So you think about production companies or producers as businesses rather than everybody's dream film that they want to make. Because what tends to happen is, if it's about the dream film, it generally will or in many instances, it will evolve or come from the writer or the director of the film. Sometimes they don't even have a producer attached. Yeah. So even for the creators to get to the next level, there needs to be a number of producer companies that will then, work with various creatives to get various films and TV series made in that period of time. I think, just to qualify, Mindseeker is, it's not going to be a production company where you got the producers will always drive it because they are the business.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But they can have different directors on the projects, different writers, so there will still be opportunity for people, but because the producer's now driving it as a business, and they're equally looking at the scripts and the directors, making the directors pitch, building relationships with strong crew and talent agencies and so on, it just brings a level of stability and still creates those jobs over a period of time because you're basing it on a slate. So a producer is not sitting with every single writer or director that comes to them with a project, having to do it absolutely from scratch. They also then equally in the position where they can say, what, this one, it's just, it's not going to cut it. But I think you're a talented director. I have another project that we're working on. Have a read of that. So I don't think what he means is that you give 10 people money to do slates and they're going to use exactly the same director, exactly the same actors, the same. It's going to be all different. But you're enabling production companies to work on slates that there's sustainability in those production companies, and they will pull in the industry for the various projects as they need to. So and also, it's just shifting focus from it being originated by a writer or a director and then having to go through various funding processes to producers stepping into the space where they function anyway. And I agree with you. I mean, you can probably on 2 hands count the companies that can do this.
Yeah, and also, you asked about a recovery plan, right? It has at the beginning, what is probably the best recovery plan for us to come out of this pandemic, whether in production or in distribution, and because these are all things interlinked, and if I take it to, when the president announced a recovery plan for the economy in South Africa, right? And then he talks about infrastructure funding, all these other funding opportunities that will be purely to get companies back into working again. For us in this film and TV, if we are still funding once-off projects, we are not necessarily bringing a recovery plan to the economy.
So
Instead,
I'm gonna ask you a question whilst you are still responding to that. So as I'm looking on the other side, I'm just taking questions from our audiences. So there's our audience, Sihle Zung is saying, what is the plan to have enough Black content in all categories, and how should it look like? And how possible is that to make it happen? And what is it that's stopping us to have enough Black content? So I think Sihle's question is specific to Black content creation, to say, what is the plan to have it enough and accessible, and why currently, in her on his opinion, we don't have enough Black content, and what is stopping us from having enough Black content? I think that's the first question. And the second one will be because of US government is not using US financiers don't use government funding, and they still have enough funding. What's stopping us from getting alternative funding outside of government and still making a big impact in the market and in the industry?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll take the two questions, and then I'll hand over to Helen Kuhn. I think the first question is between myself and Helen Kuhn, we only work with mostly Black. I think our slate is probably almost 80% Black, right? Except maybe for some African titles that Helen Kuhn works. I do think I think there's more Black content being created, whether it's getting to the market and which platform it is. I'm not sure. I guess it'd be good to know what he refers as Black content. Is it television, or is it purely what he watches? But I do think lots of people, just because we are in South Africa, we are creating a lot of Black content. But of course, it comes down to access to funding at the end of the day. Whether are you able to finance the properties you want to create. Most of our movies are mostly Black. And I think even, if you watch television, there's a lot of that. Again, depending which television you watch, which channel you watch, you might realize that it's not Black. Mzansi Magic has got a lot of that, SABC. So I think even movies, they do, depending which channel you're watching. For me, I think it's always Black. The second one, you must understand the US market is a distribution market. And it's purely driven by 6 big distributors, which are the studios, or 5 now, right? And sales companies. So because that market is a purely distribution finance market, and it's market facing, that's why it works. And it does not necessarily need a lot of government fund, or government fund doesn't exist. When it started, there were incentives in the US. There were government incentives to push the market to be where it is. But still, Hollywood uses a lot of incentives all over the world. They shoot in South Africa, they shoot everywhere. But they use it as a way to recoup their investment or to reduce their budget. But purely, they have a market. They know, if I make for this much, I'm going to sell for this much. Here in South Africa, it's still a developing market. And a lot of people are so dependent on government. And it could work against us. If at any point government were to run out of money, let's say the DTI or GFC, the industry will be dead, because we are not there yet where we are a market-facing industry. We're still and it's because of the content we create. And I use an example. We talk about the biggest money, the biggest studio is Disney, right? What does Disney make? A lot of family content, a lot of kids content. And we need to get to the point where we have enough production and distribution companies in South Africa that are creating or helping to create content that is market facing. But because everything is government linked, it tends to not necessarily be market facing. And I say this thing again is because everything created by government for government does not necessarily have a market, but everything created purely for the market tends to grow the industry. So that's kind of my answer to it. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks, Maya.
I think I'm just, I don't think one can ever, let's start there. You can never have enough content, basically. I don't think that there's a ceiling on that. So there is thousands of hours of Black content being generated in the country, especially by the Mzansi channels. And on the feature film side, like literally, I mean, we have like well, us as a distributor, we have one, maybe two Afrikaans titles in a year. The rest of our titles, we do 10 to 12 titles in a year, are all black. So I mean, it's a critical thing. Obviously, it's our market, it's our audience. I mean, that's where the growth potential is, you know. So it's our people. So I think maybe that question actually refers to us speaking about the kids' content earlier on, and when my executive was saying, you know, you've got a 6-year-old child and you can't find enough content for that child that is black, that the child can see themselves. So that is the gap that we identified. I think the rest, more and more and more and more content by black creators for black audiences, you know, with black talent, that's a growing, expanding, exploding thing, actually. I mean, the Mzansi channels are so successful that if you speak to Boho or the team at Mzansi, they will tell you the audience for those 6 channels is so loyal, and they love South African content so much that even if they just put an African American film on, or they put a film from the rest of Africa or a series on of the Mzansi channels, they just see the viewership drop. The requirement for the audience for those channels is South African stories, South African talent, South African everything. And the second they mix it up, the viewership drops. So there is a clear captive following of people already established and grown by the Mzansi channels, which I think has been a very different strategy to what the SABC may have had over time, or ETV has, or this is very particular. So yes, of course, we can always have more. There's no question about always wanting more. I mean, we were saying earlier on, we want more volume. And volume can only be driven by, you know, structure, if it's slates like we were talking about, or if it's centralized where you've got a variety of skill sets together. Filmmaking and TV producing is a team sport. You cannot do it alone. It requires a whole lot of people. It's not a thing that you can just do yourself there with your phone and think you're going to reach massive audiences. So I think that would be my view on the first question. And the second question about commercial viability, really, is what this person is saying, is we are in a precarious position. I mean, if DTI pulls out of the film industry, we're dead, like immediately, because the films are not making the kind of money in most instances that they can actually break, even if there was to be no incentive in them. It's probably what will survive, again, will be the Mzansi channels, the KykNet channels, the Mnet, that's all self-funded, right? And advertised. So it's not like there'll be no work in the industry. Thank heavens, because, you know, MultiChoice have developed all these local channels over time. It's work. So there will be more work that will survive. They also, even as a broadcaster, are more and more driven by commercial imperative and not necessarily wanting to invest in films where they're investing in films that have no chance of ever recouping its cost. So, and you know, we need to tap into the treaties. We need to, if you speak to filmmakers, it's extraordinary where they find money. They find money in all sorts of places. I mean, it constantly amazes me how people can actually convince people to give them money to make films. So I do think that there's loads of people that do find money, and there are films that make their money back, and then some of that money is used for the next film. But I think it's time, and it will take a bit more time, and we're only really now in the last couple of years getting to a market-facing, market understanding thinking in the industry. That's not simply about, I want to tell my life story in a film. You know, that really was a trend for a very long time. Yes. And now you are getting filmmakers are telling you, listen, I've got so many awards on my shelf now. That's fabulous. But can I just make a film that makes some money? I want to reach bigger audiences, you know. So that is starting to happen. And that could only happen when the creative community was ready to start engaging in telling stories that are structured in such a way that it's intended to be popular. It's not, you know, it's right from the get-go. It's intended to be popular. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of that around, you know. you speak to a company like Burnt Onion and they're looking for a director for a film that they can produce the next film and not necessarily direct. And they can't find, the directors don't want to do comedy. And these guys are really good at comedy, right? I mean, they do comedy, that's their thing. So they're going to end up directing the film again themselves because the creatives want to do heavy drama, and these are realities. So if there's a willingness in the creative community to make these kinds of films that can make money, the industry will over time, and our production values have also increased radically. I mean, it really came off the bat of not being that great. But we have now, over time, built a slate of films that have really fantastic production values.
Yeah.
So, all of that, there's all building blocks that you have to put in place over a period of time. When you're on those building blocks, then you can start getting money from other places, not just from South Africa, from other places in the world, to go into films, do the slates, because you can prove that you can deliver quality. Because ultimately, that's what it's about. Even if you make a rom-com, if you make it badly, it's still going to fail. It still has to be well written, well acted. It has to really be funny. There must be chemistry between the people that are falling in love with each other. So there's a difference between making a film and making a film well.
And making
it's not the same thing.
Just from your reports, Helen, how well did Seriously Single and The Letter Reader do on Netflix?
Letter Reader is actually going on box office on Friday, the 23rd. So that plan changed over time.
Congratulations.
So that'll be up on DSTV box office on the 23rd. And then it will, then it's going on to television after that. And Seriously Single, the way that the S5 platforms report is very high level. So they don't give you exact numbers. None of them do. Not Showmax or Netflix, or it's only the TVOD or the pay-per-view platforms that you can get exact numbers. But Seriously Single did their feedback was it was in the top 3 performing films in that when it just launched in over 30 countries worldwide. So it did really well. It crossed over well in Africa as well, which was a great win, because it's tough to get content that can play across the continent, like we said before. There's so many different laws and political scenarios across our continent that it's hard to find something that can play across all the countries. So it did particularly well in South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, and they were very happy about that. And then Romania, for some reason, it did extremely well. Latin America, it did well, and that's starting to become a trend. I think Latin America, there is obviously an appetite for our kind of content in Latin America as well, as there is here to an extent.
But Letters of Hope is the one that is going on DSTV box office. I'm talking about the short film, the Letter Reader.
The Letter Reader. Sorry.
Letter Reader.
Yes. Letter Reader did really well. I don't know numbers, but in the feedback from Netflix, it was way above their expectation. So they didn't give us a top 10 countries or anything like that. And obviously it was the first or one of the first short films that they took or acquired from here. And they are quite keen on doing a series, not a range of short films. I mean, we've all been looking for short films for them, but that was one of the that was a flying success. It did most of its business in Africa. It didn't really cross over as much outside of LATAM than what they were hoping for, but it went up and it's up and it did well, and it's available for the world to watch. And I mean, that's just that's like a masterpiece short film. I mean, it's really spectacular.
What should we look out for from AAA in the soon future, in the now future?
Yeah, I think most of the projects are under non-disclosure.
There you go.
I'm not allowed to share. These people kind of like lock you in till they announce them. But I think as I said, I think I mentioned earlier that whatever Helen Kuhn is putting onto cinema or anything, mostly some of those projects I'm already attached for global business.
Yes.
So it's always like a, you know, a co-working relationship. But of course, I think also just from the development perspective, we are developing our own projects that we feel like the market needs to start looking at, you know. So those are the things that we're also doing. And yes, you know, and I mean, I'm known for collaborating with probably all the top producers, right? For films in South Africa, help them, you know, finance, package. So it's one of those things, again, I can't say anything about it, you know, because this thing is live. So I'll lose my clients.
Filmmakers always say, distributors, they speak like they can go on and on, but you did not hear them because they're actually not giving you anything, but they're giving you something, but they are not saying anything. So no one never understands you, but but you're
yeah,
there.
no, but yeah, I mean, I think there's like some exciting big announcements coming. You know, I think more and more I'm hoping again that, you know, things changes in the production space. You know, more and more we're coming in terms of helping just to finance the deals. And of course, there's some big projects that are coming into major platforms, but can't really say anything about it. So I do think we are, you know, we are excited. I think also the opportunities there, I think we are in the new normal. You know, I think more and more, I think Helen Kuhn will tell you, most of my conversation is about rebranding the industry as a whole. It's about how do we kind of find a way to not to go back to where we are. You know, what COVID has taught us that the industry almost died, completely dismal. Now I'm trying to find a way, just from a financing perspective, that we don't come back to this. You know, where we have, I think we have to segment our industry to a certain degree. Like we do, we have up and coming, we have high end. We have to keep our high end production companies alive. And the only way we can do that is how we structure our financing. You know, start more and more looking into the slate. So I'm pushing more and more for that as a sales company. Let's do slate projects, because then I get to make money, right? In slate projects, I get to also to be to survive.
Yeah, but it's also sustainability, right? I mean, the thing is that there's slate projects, it's sustainability. It increases our ability to plan, date the films, and plan the sales, plan the distribution, date them in such a way that the films actually help each other, not cannibalize one another. You know, leverage other films that are out there from a marketing point of view for trailering opportunities, poster opportunities. So like make Hollywood work for us as well, you know, not just the other way around.
And you know, the honest truth,
and I think for time.
The honest truth is,
conversation is nice, but we can go on forever.
Yeah. So no, I do think as final comments, the global market, you know, thank you to platforms like Netflix, because, you know, we've always been preaching the opportunity that exists. You know, these countries that Helen Kuhn mentioned, Latin America, China, all these markets have always been open. We've been preaching this to producers, that there is opportunity. You know, there's so many, some of these North American channels are wanting to buy great content from South Africa. I think the opportunity now does exist. But again, I want to say, it's difficult to be able to say to emerging filmmakers, you're going to make it, right? And I think from a company perspective, I do think emerging filmmakers, you have to make as many short films. You know, there's money there, the NFVF for short films. Make as many of those, you know, make 200K and make money. But for the high-end established filmmakers, there's an opportunity now in the global market where, with your experience, if you start creating the commercially viable projects, that you can start becoming sustainable. I think we need to come together to start fighting for sustainability so that our industry is able to survive. For me, I think that's kind of like my final word to say. I think it's time to collaborate more. We need to collaborate more and more now, especially now coming back from COVID. You know, lots of people have been hit hard. So I do think we need a lot of collaboration and start to create content that appeals to the right audience.
Thank you so much, Maya. So Elicit says he's very happy that the industry is opening up, which is very good. However, he feels that the industry is only open for Gauteng people. and there seemed to be a huge negligence on other provinces and other languages for content creation. So I think that's just a comment to say, yes, in as much as the industry is all well and good, but there seemed to be more attention given to how. But I suppose I don't really think it's Gauteng is given the opportunity, illicit. I think it's more on people, particularly from a government experience, to respond to illicit, is that people always have freelancers. They always move around to where the money is. So I know when our sister agency KZN Film Commission was launched and it opened, a lot of filmmakers, they flocked to KZN because of the money was available in KZN. And when the money changes and it goes somewhere else, filmmakers are always willing to pack their bags and then move. So illicit, the industry is not closed. We are encouraging filmmakers to create content in all the languages, all the official languages. And I think, yes, even from all the other provinces, please do feel free to create your content and just speak to the right distributors as and when you need help. Then you'll be guided according to the film that you're trying to make, the length of the film, the genre that you're looking to focus on. And I think advice could always be given. So please don't be discouraged in any way. The industry is not only consisting of filmmakers from Gauteng and content that is from Gauteng. So please go wild in those provinces. In actual fact, among the things that we all want to promote as South Africans is promoting South African languages, one, and in terms of preserving who South Africans are. Number two is also promoting South African locations, because we're trying to ensure that South Africa is a preferred destination for film production. So I think there's still an opportunity for one to just go wild. You know, I know Eastern Cape is very good with the forest. KZN, Durban, they've got nice oceans. Cape Town has the oceans and all. So the more we get newer locations as well, refreshes the eye of audiences, which I think is very encouraged. So I think you can do that. Helen, last words from you?
I really just want to echo the collaboration sentiment, because it's a tough industry that we're all in as it is, even though it's one of the industries that survived COVID, and entertainment, there will never be an end to people's need to be entertained. It's built into human DNA. So we're not going to get past to continue the content, to continue becoming more and more excellent. We need to collaborate more and more and more and more. That's really the key sentiment I want to echo. I think content will continue to be enjoyed by South Africans here and elsewhere, and so I'm pretty optimistic. I know that it's tough times, but I think the fact that the various sizes of screens are now started to be taken seriously by a much wider range of creatives in our industry means we can actually take the next leap, So collaborate.
So I think what I'm taking out of today's conversation was that the themes were centered around collaborations. It was around sustainability. It was about support from government to productions, a need to create more kids content, and also a need to create more faith-based content, which these two genres have not been fully exploited from South African productions perspective. And I think, thank you so much for availing your time to always sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and opportunities which exist in the industry. I would like to also thank our partners, the Ritual Store, Arts Alive, the City of Johannesburg, in making sure that we have the spaces to share these necessary conversations. Thank you, Mayenzeke Basa from AAA, and Helen Kuhn from Indigenous Film Distributions. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Ntabeling Porter from the Gauteng Film Commission. And thank you, and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thank you for looking after us.